Have you ever thought you really knew something about, say, a major world religion, only to find out the reality is way more complex, more surprising than any headline, especially Islam?
Absolutely. That happens all the time, and that's exactly the journey we're on today. We're diving deep into the complexities of women's status and, the dynamic presence of Islam right here in the West.
Okay.
We've got some really illuminating material from Professor John L. Esposito's Great World Religions, Islam. And honestly, it's full of insights that challenge those simple ideas, those assumptions many people hold.
So our mission today is basically to unpack these critical areas, yeah? Moving past the stereotypes to see the incredible diversity, the evolution within Muslim societies, both traditionally Muslim countries and here in the West.
Exactly. We'll touch on progress, struggles, some really surprising facts, things that should hopefully expand understanding.
Okay, let's dive into that first big topic then. Women in Islam. I think for a lot of people in the West, one image probably springs to mind, maybe influenced by extremists or news from specific regions. But the source material, it paints a much more complicated picture right away, doesn't it?
It really does. What's fascinating, and Professor Esposito calls this out, is that women's status is a hotly contested issue. But the explanations, the realities, are as diverse as the Muslim world itself. It's not one thing.
So, like, examples.
Yeah, okay. So you find Muslim women in some countries driving cars, holding every kind of professional job imaginable. Ambassadors, members of parliament, even judges. Like Morocco, over 20% of judges there are women.
Wow.
And women often outnumber men at universities in many places, have had voting rights for ages. But then in other countries, you see situations where, historically at least, women needed a male guardian's permission to travel or couldn't drive. It's a huge spectrum.
Okay, that totally shatters the idea that it's all one way. But it raises a question for me then. If the original texts, as we might get to, were actually progressive for their time, why do we still see these disparities? Why the oppression in some places? Is it just bad interpretation?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the sources suggest it's this complex back and forth. Esposito calls it an erratic and vacillating and contradictory dialectic process. So it creates these weird anomalies, these struggles. But it also means Muslim women today are actively forging new paths. They're reinterpreting the Quran, the traditions.
Can you give an example of that contradiction?
Sure. Think about Egypt. Women can't be judges there, but they've served in parliament, even in the cabinet. Or Iran, often seen as very fundamentalist, right?
Right.
Women have to wear the chadar, the full covering. But, and this is the twist, they make up the majority of university students. They hold professional jobs, they've been in parliament, even served as vice president.
Yeah, the contradictions are stark. It really highlights that it's not Islam oppresses women as a blanket statement, but maybe the practice varies wildly, influenced by culture, by history, by interpretation.
That's exactly right. You've hit the nail on the head. And this leads us to a really crucial point. The difference between the foundational texts and how they've been interpreted over time.
Okay.
The revelation of Islam, back in the 7th century, it actually raised the status of women significantly for that era. The Quran banned female infanticide, which was practiced then.
Right.
It abolished the idea of women as property, gave them legal standing, the right to their own dowry, which was huge. Marriage changed from ownership to a contract.
In a contract.
Yes.
Yes.
And it guaranteed women financial support, even put limits on a husband's ability to just divorce unilaterally. And crucially, the Quran states men and women are equal in the eyes of God. It talks about their relationship being one of love and mercy, like they're members of one another.
That's a massive difference from the common perception. It really reframes things. So it sounds like many issues we see today might stem more from, well, human interpretations stacking up over centuries rather than the original text itself. Is that fair?
That's a very fair assessment, yes. The sources are clear. Most Muslim societies have been patriarchal. And the Quran, the Hadith, the Prophet's sayings and actions, Islamic law, these have long been interpreted by men. It's a pattern, it's similar to how patriarchy shaped women's roles in Christianity and Judaism historically.
Sure, makes sense.
So today, you have reformers, many of them women, arguing that traditional readings of verses that seem to give men priority, like Quran 4.34, need a fresh look. They argue any priority mentioned was about historical, socioeconomic responsibilities, not some inherent superiority.
And this isn't just academic talk.
Not at all. This is happening on the ground. Women are participating more visibly in mosques, teaching Quran classes, even running for political office. They're pushing for change from within the tradition.
Okay, but what about those specific verses that often get brought up? Like, I think there's one about witnesses, where 2 female witnesses equal 1 male. How does that fit with equality?
Yeah, Quran 2.282. That's a classic example. And you're right, it's often raised. Traditional male scholars tended to interpret that very literally.
Okay.
But contemporary reformers emphasize the socio-historical context. Remember, this was revealed when women generally weren't involved in finance or business dealings.
Right, different world.
So they argue the verse isn't some eternal ban on women's equality in testimony or business. It doesn't prohibit education, religious or secular, needed to be equal partners. And it aligns with broader Quranic principles about property rights, investment.
Which you see women exercising today.
Exactly. Even in a place often seen as very conservative like Saudi Arabia, women are significantly involved in real estate, business ownership, investment. So the spirit of financial independence is very much alive, even if interpretations of specific verses are debated.
Okay, that paints a really intricate global picture. Now let's pivot a bit. How does this faith, with all its diversity and evolution, establish itself and exist here, in the West? I think many people assume Islam's presence here is relatively recent, maybe a post-9/11 thing.
Yeah, that's a common thought, but the history is actually much, much deeper. And this part is really interesting. Islam's presence in the West is way older and larger than most people realize. In America, it's already the 3rd largest religion. We're talking at least 6 million Muslims, maybe more. And it's projected to become the 2nd largest soon.
Wow, okay, 3rd largest.
But historically, Muslims were here long before the big waves of immigration in the 19th and 20th centuries. You had Morisco Spanish Muslims, descendants of Spanish Muslims forced to convert.
Right, you mentioned them.
And, crucially, estimates suggest that between 14 and 20% of the African slaves forcibly brought to America were Muslim.
14 to 20%, that's huge.
It is. They were forced to convert, of course, but their presence is a foundational, though often completely overlooked, part of American history.
I had to say, I'm genuinely taken aback by that. The depth of those roots, Morisco Muslims, enslaved Africans, that completely changes the timeline most of us probably have in our heads.
It really does.
And I guess the diversity within the Muslim community in the West today is probably just as underestimated.
Absolutely. Just like the broader American population, Muslims in America are incredibly diverse.
Yeah.
About 2/3 are immigrants or their descendants, yes. But a really significant 1/3 are indigenous Muslims.
Indigenous meaning?
Meaning African-American converts, white American converts, Hispanic Muslims. People whose roots in Islam in America don't necessarily come from recent immigration.
Okay.
And Esposito emphasizes this. They are secular and religious, observant and non-observant, liberal, conservative, fundamentalist, Democrat, and Republican.
So totally shattering the monolithic stereotype.
Completely. It challenges that common but wrong assumption that all Muslims are identical in belief and practice, or all recent arrivals.
It really is a mosaic, and that strand of African-American Islam, like the Nation of Islam you mentioned earlier, that's a whole fascinating story within this indigenous part, right? Showing change and adaptation.
Indeed. The Nation of Islam, founded by Wallace D. Fard Muhammad, then led by Elijah Muhammad. It emerged in the early 20th century, really focused on Black liberation, Black empowerment.
With Malcolm X being a key figure for a time.
A very prominent figure, yes.
Yeah.
But he famously broke away and embraced mainstream Sunni Islam after his Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, rejecting the nation's more separatist ideas.
Right.
And then later, Elijah Muhammad's own son, Wallace D. Muhammad, actually reformed the nation. He brought it into line with Orthodox Sunni Islam, dropped the Black separatist doctrines, and explicitly reaffirmed the equality of male and female members.
So constant reevaluation, adaptation, even within that specific community.
Exactly. It shows this ongoing internal evolution.
Okay, so we have this diverse, long-standing presence, but what does that actually mean for Muslims living in Western societies today? It sounds like there must be major challenges around, identity, belonging, acceptance.
Absolutely. That's a central question.
Yeah.
How do you navigate acceptance? The sources point out that for decades, Muslims were kind of mostly invisible in the West. Then they became visible, but often by association with the militant Nation of Islam or conflicts such as the Iranian Revolution. And then post 9/11, well, that visibility exploded, often leading to fear, distrust, reinforcing that clash of civilizations idea.
Yeah.
So Muslims in the West, much like other groups before them, think Irish immigrants, Italian immigrants, Jewish and Catholic communities,
Right.
they face similar struggles. Assimilation versus maintaining identity, integration, dealing with intermarriage questions, facing discrimination in jobs, in society generally.
It's a powerful parallel, but it's striking, isn't it, that sometimes other groups who went through very similar things don't always see that connection. They fall into that us and them trap.
That is a profound irony, and the sources mention it, that some non-Muslim minorities who sort of made it in America sometimes fail to see the similarities between their own past and Muslims' current problems.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, it's complex. Maybe a sense of distance. Maybe Islam is perceived as more foreign than, say, European Christian or Jewish traditions, even though it's Abrahamic. It leads to marginalizing Muslims from that comfortable circle of American pluralism.
It really sounds like a constant balancing act for Muslims in the West, preserving who you are but also fitting in. How are they managing that day to day?
They're doing it in lots of different ways.
Hmm.
You see active participation in interfaith dialogue, trying to build bridges.
Okay.
You also see the formation of national organizations like SARA, the Council for American Islamic Relations, specifically to monitor issues and advocate for the community's interests.
Right, protecting civil rights.
Exactly. And there's a conscious effort now to develop native imams, religious leaders trained in the West who understand the specific context, the culture here, moving away from relying solely on scholars from overseas.
That makes sense. What about specific religious practices?
Yeah, practical concerns persist. Things like getting time off for daily prayers at work, arranging things for Friday congregational prayers at the mosque, finding halal food options in schools or hospitals, and of course, the right to wear the hijab, the headscarf.
Ah, yes, the hijab. That seems to be a constant flashpoint, doesn't it? Not just in France, but you hear debates even within Muslim-majority countries. How do younger Muslim women here tend to see it?
It's really fascinating and often paradoxical. The debate absolutely isn't just a French issue. It happens in Turkey, Tunisia, and definitely here in America.
Mm-hmm.
And while some people externally might see it purely as a symbol of oppression, for many women, especially younger women in the West, it's the opposite. They describe it as a symbol of freedom.
Freedom. How so?
Freedom to assert their religious identity in a secular society, a way to navigate modernity while holding on to tradition. It's seen as a bridge between their religious tradition and the realities of modern life.
So, a conscious choice.
Very much so. In fact, you see a trend where young women whose mothers or grandmothers didn't wear the hijab are now choosing to do so. It's a personal, often deeply spiritual decision about expressing faith and identity in today's world.
That adds another layer of complexity.
It really does. So if there's one big thing to take away from our deep dive today, it's probably this. Islam, whether we're talking about women's status or its presence here in the West, is just defined by immense diversity.
Yeah.
And it's constantly in process, reinterpreting, adapting.
Right, not static at all.
Not at all. To get any real understanding, we have to move past those simple monolithic stereotypes. We need to engage with the internal debates, the history, the huge variety of lived experiences of millions of Muslims. It's a living, breathing, evolving faith.
I really like that summary. It's simple but cuts deep. It just underscores how vital it is to look beyond the easy headlines and actually seek out the nuances. Thanks for breaking all that down for us. It makes it so clear why these dynamics matter. And if you, listening, want to explore these ideas further, definitely check out the links to Professor John L. Esposito's Great World Religions, Islam, in our show notes. It's a fantastic resource to continue learning.
Yes, absolutely. And please let us know what resonated with you, what surprised you. Drop a comment or find us on social media. Your questions, your insights, they help everyone learn. And maybe just one final thought to leave you with. The Quran itself has a verse that says, "O humankind, we have created you male and female and made you nations and tribes so that you might come to know one another." That's Quran 49.13. That divine affirmation of diversity. It suggests that trying to understand each other across cultures, across faiths, maybe it's not just an intellectual thing. Maybe it's something more like a sacred calling, something essential.